Can I start? Well, thank you so much. It was a great honor for me to be invited by the Maltese presidency of the Security Council to brief the Council about the sea level rise in relation to international law and the work of the International Law Commission as a Foreign Minister of Romania, but also at the same time as co-chair of the study group of the International Law Commission on sea level rise in relation to international law. It is important to discuss also about such kind of threats to the international peace and security, not only about important threats like the Russian war against Ukraine, because also such phenomena like sea level rise being a direct consequence of climate change, also impact the global security. And indeed, sea level rise, as I mentioned today in my intervention in the Council, has a direct implication on more than 2/3 of UN member states. Either directly or indirectly, more than 2/3 of the member states of the United Nations are affected by this phenomenon, and the science is quite clear in that respect. There are mounting hazards for human and state security which are resulting from sea level rise. Indeed, if we take into account the impact on the coasts, which are pushed landward, if we take into account the effect on the baselines, because from the baselines the maritime zones are measured, so effects on the maritime zones and threats on the entitlements of states on maritime zones and the resources within these maritime zones, then of course the loss of resources and the increased competition on resources, and then of course the deterioration of living conditions, forced migration and displacement. All these, including loss of territory, which is also possible because of sea level rise, create the picture of an existential threat to low-lying coastal states, but also to small island developing states. And I have focused in my intervention on which could be the response options. And from this perspective, there are, of course, various responses. For instance, coasts might be protected physically in order to reinforce the coasts by fortifications or consolidation or protection of the coast, but this is costly, and the small island developing states and the low-lying coastal states in majority do not have the money in order to afford such efforts. That's why I have suggested to take into account the possibility of creating an international voluntary fund in order to support such efforts of developing states in order to protect their coasts. But at the same time, there is also the response which might be provided by international law. The International Law Commission and the study group that I am co-chairing in the International Law Commission has provided some options, and the International Law Commission already since 2019 has included this topic on its active agenda, and we have prepared already a first issues paper in 2020 focusing on law of the sea aspects of sea level rise, and then in 2022 a second issues paper focusing on statehood and protection of persons. And one such answer that could be provided is an interpretation of the Convention on the Law of the Sea of 1982, that there is no obligation under this treaty to update the baselines and outer limits of maritime zones, to update the charts or lists of coordinates which are deposited with the Secretary General of the United Nations. And from this perspective, the maritime zones can be preserved, and also the entitlements and the rights on the resources which are in these maritime zones. That means freezing the baselines and preserving the baselines and the outer limits of maritime zones. Also, it is important to give an urgent answer to the humanitarian consequences, because I mentioned already the eventuality of displacement or forced migration. In that respect, it is important that the fundamental rights of the persons, the identity of persons which are compelled to settle on the territory of third states to be thoroughly protected. It is important that the right to self-determination of these populations be also preserved. It is important that the rights of affected states with respect to the cultural heritage also to be protected. And of course, it is very much much important to take into account especially the vulnerable groups, which are women, children, elderly, and indigenous populations. So all these options could provide the response of the international law to these issues. Within the International Law Commission, we continue to work on these aspects, and we plan to finalize our work in 2025. This year, we will provide, and we are in the course of finalizing another paper on law of the sea aspects related to sea level rise, and we hope that it will provide helpful options in order to respond to these challenges.